Hi guys, I hope you will be okay. In today's session, I'm going to talk of autonomy versus integration debate and gender studies. You might have noticed that this question has been asked by examiners in various years, and this is one of the most repeated questions in your past exams as well. So this question is it is very easy and it is very easy to grasp as well. But to some extent, students, they are going to have more confusion that what was that actual debate when you're going to use the word autonomy versus integration debate in gender studies. So you know very well what was the purpose of gender study. The purpose of gender study was to achieve equality. The purpose of gender study was that all individuals, they should be provided level playing opportunities. So there should be no more discrimination. There should be no biasness. There should be no element of superiority or inferiority. All individuals, they are human beings and they need to be given equal rights and they need to be treated on equal responsibilities as well. So in order to achieve that purpose, the overall approach and overall the strategy and overall the discussion that was going to be conducted within the discipline of gender study, that is known as autonomy versus integration debate in gender studies. Okay, now I'm going to talk of autonomy approach in gender study. When you are going to use autonomy approach, it means this group of feminists, they were of the view that a gender study needs to be introduced independently. It should not merge, it should not get introduced with any other discipline as well. As I have already discussed with you guys that what was the multidisciplinary nature of gender studies, because being a multidisciplinary nature of gender study, it has a more connectivity with other disciplines like sociology, psychology, anthropology. Then you could talk of literature, economics, political science, psychology, and many other disciplines as well. Since gender study was going to be considered more multidisciplinary, so one view was that it needs to be merged with other disciplines as well. But autonomous approach was of the view that not necessarily that gender study being a multidisciplinary nature as well, it needs to be introduced independently. It should not be merged with any other discipline. So that was autonomous approach. It needs to be kept independently. That was autonomous. So when you are going to introduce a discipline independently, so what would be the objective? The objective is that you are going to have more in-depth discussion. You remain more focused. You remain more committed. You are going to have more spaces to highlight the issues of different individuals. You know very well that individuals they are going to have various differences. So these differences they could be understood in two ways: inter differences and intra differences. Interdifferences means that the difference between male and female, and for example, if you're talking of female and transgender and male, so these differences they're going to be considered as interdifferences. In simple way, I would say when you're going to make a comparison of two sexes, that would be interdifference. Intradifferences means that even within the members of same sex, you are going to talk of that they are not going to be treated equally. So that would be intra-differences. For example, a female who belongs to lower class and a female who belongs to upper class, whether they're going to have same treatment in the society, the answer is no. Whether they're going to have the same opportunities in society, the answer is no. So that would be the intra-differences. Similarly, if you're talking of a male, so if a male belongs to upper class and a second male belongs to middle class, so obviously they're going to be treated differently in society. Okay. At the same time, when you're talking about the transgender, so whether the transgender, for example, if you're talking of Nisha Rao, if you're talking of many other transgender as well, you could talk of Rimal and many other transgenders as well. And at the same time, there are certain transgenders whom you are going to find just on the roads and they're going to get involved in begging as well. So it means sometimes individuals, they're going to be kept within the same sex, but at the same time, they're not going to be treated equally in society. So that is known as interdifferences. The purpose of autonomy approach was that this discipline needs to be introduced independently because you are going to have more spaces in order to highlight the issues of all individuals, being men, being women, and being transgenders. Okay, so this detailed discussion can only be conducted when gender study is going to be introduced independently. Then you could talk of their political issues, you could talk of their economic issues, you talk of their social issues, you talk of many other issues as well. For example, even in today's societies as well. On one side, we are talking of the educational issues. Okay, then you could talk of the political issues. Within political issues, you're going to talk of their right to vote. You're going to talk of right to be nominated as a candidates. Then you could talk of right being a member of the parliament. So it means you are going to have the different issues as well. Similarly, we're going to talk of different civil rights as well. For example, right to movement, then you could talk of right to marriage, then you could talk of your even right to education as well, then your right to worship as well. Okay, so all these issues are going to be discussed thoroughly, and it is quite possible when this discipline is going to be given separate space. It doesn't need to be included within another discipline. It doesn't need to be merged within any other discipline. Because when you merge with other discipline, it means that this subject is not going to have more in-depth discussion. Then only few things are going to be discussed. For example, in today's society, when you're talking of the gender studies, even we are going to talk of the more independence and even sexual orientation as well. Not necessarily when you are going to merge with other disciplines, so you're going to have more in-depth discussion. Like now we are going to talk of the marital rape, that marital rape should be considered as a crime. Because obviously because you are in a contract with other person and you are going to be considered a partner, but it doesn't mean you are a slave of your partner as well. So these in-depth discussions, they could only be further pursued when you are going to introduce this discipline independently. Okay. On the other side, when you're talking of the integration debate was that individuals, they're going to at the same time, the first argument was that a gender study, not necessarily it needs to be introduced independently, even it could be merged with other disciplines as well. Remember, both approaches, autonomy versus integration debate, these both perspectives, they have just one objective, one goal, that was to achieve equality among individuals. So their purpose was that your concern is in integration debate, your purpose is that individuals, they need to be given equality. Not necessarily you need to introduce this discipline independently, even it could be merged with another discipline and the same goal that could be achieved as well. Because obviously when you're going to merge with other discipline, you're going to give more awareness, you're going to talk of equality as well. On the other side, you're going to have some sort of more advantages as well. And what would be the advantage as well? That would be the more cost-saving methodology. That would be the more cost-saving perspective. Because you don't need to have independent discipline. You don't need to have you don't need to hire separate human resource. You don't need to construct separate buildings. You don't need to have your separate security cost. Okay. At the same time, you don't need to have your separate economic cost as well. Because if you are going to include the syllabus of gender study with the sociology, so obviously there are already certain departments which are going to pursue this discipline, and there are certain human resources available as well. So that was the debate, that not necessarily it needs to be introduced independently, because it is a more multidisciplinary nature, and even that objective can be achieved when you're going to merge with the other disciplines as well. So that was the integration approach. And the second approach was that in autonomous approach, all the time we say that individuals, especially if you say why individuals, they're not going to be treated equally. So you can talk of that even all the individuals, within individuals, you're going to have the more differences as well. So all individuals, they need to be discussed separately in autonomous approach. Okay. For example, first of all, you could talk of, okay, male, female and transgender, they're not going to be treated equally. Then you could talk of further discussion, okay, among men, all the members, they're not going to be treated equally. Then you could talk of various ethnic issues, they're not going to be treated equally. Then you could talk of various other factors as well, a nationality issue as well. Then you could talk of racism as well. So the entire discussion can be easily conducted, and the more awareness can be more promoted, and individuals, they should be taken more on board when you're going to have more autonomous approach, when you're going to have an independent discipline. So in integration debate, we are going to talk of that, first of all, gender study being a multidisciplinary nature. At the same time, when you're talking about sociology, so again, we are talking about the social norms. And the social norms are equally applicable even in the gender studies as well. So you can't say both two disciplines, they are entirely in a different, they operate in a different zone. So you can say that both, they have some sort of more connectivity and they have some sort of more bondage with each other. So there would be no harm, even gender studies going to get merged with the sociology and other disciplines as well. At the same time, you can talk of that the individual issues, they can't be judged independently without that recognizing other factors as well. Because especially we have to understand that at what extent culture influence individuals, on the basis of which individuals are going to be discriminated. Then you could talk about some sort of legal factors, that obviously your legal framework plays very important role. So without recognizing the importance of law, you can't treat individuals equally in society. So it means law is also equally applicable. So you can't discriminate and you can't distinguish individuals from the law. So basically law and individuals, they're going to have some sort of coexistence. So that was the integration approach. At the same time, you could talk of some sort of certain geographical factors, environmental factors, political factors, and many other factors as well, on the basis of which you're going to talk of. That unless you have to resolve these issues, individuals, they can't be treated equally in society. So in integration debate, you're going to talk of some sort of more joining efforts. You're going to talk of a more collective and a more, you can say, you're going to talk of a more concentrated approach. And at the same time, you're going to focus more intersectionality factors as well. But when you're talking of an autonomous approach, so first of all, you're going to make the discipline of gender studies different from the other discipline. And further, you're going to talk of that all the issues, they need to be resolved independently. For example, if you talk of the man issues, so man issues, they can't be treated, they can't be treated with the women. And at the same time, you could not talk of that there should be some sort of more collective approach that would quite work here. So you could talk of no, men, they have the different issues, they could be treated differently. Women, they're going to have the different issues, so they could be treated differently. And especially if you're talking of the transgender, so you can say yes, they have their own issues, so they could be discussed differently. But in integration debate, you can talk of that these individuals, because they are going to complement one another, and they are not going to exist independently. So without resolving the issues of one, you can't talk of issues of other. So you need to go off some sort of more collective approach through which you are going to provide level playing opportunities. Still, if you have any confusion, please feel free to comment. And in other video, I'm going to talk of what would be, basically, I think you must have learned that if you're talking of the autonomy versus integration debate in gender studies, at the same time, if I'm going to talk of autonomy versus integration debate in women's study, so what would be the difference between two, gender study and women's study, especially in considering the perspective of autonomy versus integration debate. Okay, but still, if you have any confusion, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.